Rebecca, when did you get those shoes?
Around Christmas time.
They seem really cool. What brand are they? I don't know what the brand is.
Beja. They're vegan
They're vegan?
and waterproof.
What does that mean that they're vegan?
Well, I guess I don't know if they're vegan. I think they are, but what's more important is that they're sustainably produced. That's what
They're sustainably produced. This morning when I woke up and I got changed to come to work, I forgot I was filming. And I wore this.
What would you have worn?
I would have worn a really nice button up. And might have even done my hair, which happens once in a
Does
while.
anyone have a button up on?
That's a good starter.
But I also had this shirt. I have a Canucks hat. Also Canucks
shirt.
What's the hardest thing about being a Canucks fan?
Hardest, well, it's just,
Losing or?
Yep. When you're really excited about a big game and then they get 5 goals scored on them in the first period. And you're like, I don't know what I'm gonna do with my night now. I'm not gonna recover, that's for sure. All right. Hello everyone. Welcome to The Corner here. And we've switched locations again. We just want to keep you guessing. Not everybody knows Becca. This is Becca, and it's your first time hosting, right?
It is.
This Corner.
Yeah.
How are you feeling?
I feel pretty good. I might not feel that way Monday night when I watch it, but I feel pretty good right now.
I feel that.
We had a good little banter before, so.
Oh, look, someone's
you
at the
feel
door.
Comfortable?
Someone's at the door. Quite a few Amazon drop-offs here.
Tonight we're talking about the next part of the Sermon on the Mount, talking about Jesus fulfilling the law. And this is kind of a difficult passage. It's bringing a lot of things together, Old Testament, New Testament.
Yes, there's a lot of things.
Yeah. So as you were preparing for the sermon you gave, anything that really stuck out to you? Well,
while I was preparing, I was reading one commentary, and the guy was like, this is one of the hardest texts in all of Scripture. And I thought, well, thanks a lot, Chris. Our namesake here on the corner, but anyway. But yeah, it was a really interesting, complex thing to study. I read the verses before. If you're going to be in church, you likely read these verses where Jesus goes, don't think I came to abolish the law and the prophets. I didn't come to abolish, I came to fulfill. But then you realize it's really complex because law and the prophets is massive, and so we'll talk more about that in a minute. But I think what stood out to me is just how bold it was of Jesus to make this statement, and how comprehensive the statement is. I mean, it's just he's covering a lot of ground in just a couple of verses to go I've all of it, law and prophets, however that was heard, I'm fulfilling that. Yeah. And that was a huge statement for his hearers.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And so you can maybe talk more about this, but law and prophets, we're talking about kind of the ceremonial laws, Levitical laws in the Old Testament, the law, moral, ethical laws like the 10 Commandments.
Yeah.
And then the prophets, so that's the prophetic books throughout the Old Testament.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing it up. It's a complicated statement, law and prophets, because there's these moments in the New Testament where, and you know this, but just to bring us all in, is that where it seems like, well, not just seems like, it's clear from other places in the New Testament that some laws don't apply to us anymore. There's some laws that are introduced in the Old Testament where it's that doesn't apply to us. There's a couple moments in Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, where it just talks about what used to be is now obsolete. And then there's Romans, and Paul's now there's a righteousness revealed apart from the law. And so this is tricky for even a reader of the New Testament to just go, what does Jesus mean? Not one bit of it's going away. I've come to fulfill it all. And so I think, in the talk, just tried to summarize the reality that when Jesus says, I've come to fulfill law and prophets, he fulfills them in different ways. Okay. And so ceremonial laws, without getting into it all, the sacrificial system that kind of ceased to be relevant. We don't practice it anymore. Jesus fulfilled, as we study Scripture, we see that Jesus fulfilled it through his death on the cross, through actually kind of through dying for us. He actually talks about it in Hebrews, a little bit complicated. It's cool language. He talks about how Jesus' death and what he actually accomplished through the cross is a fulfillment of what was there in the Old Testament, which was really just a shadow of what's really going on in the heavenly realm. So that's that's pretty massive topic. But it's cool because it's like Jesus is like, hey, through my death, I mean, he's not saying that in that moment, but through the rest of Scripture, we get that through his death, he fulfills all the ceremonial laws that are pretty complicated and that we don't practice anymore. And then prophecy, it's like there's all these, I like to think about them as like different puzzle pieces throughout the Old Testament. They're like pointing towards something. And then through Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, he's actually going like, look, I bring it all together. These are all about me, which is pretty bold statement, but that Jesus makes very clear, like it's actually all pointing towards him. He makes sense of all of them and brings clarity to all these Old Testament prophecies, which is what he means by that, or at least partially what he means by that. But then the way in which he fulfills the law that's, I would say, most relevant to the Sermon on the Mount, which is what we're studying, is that he's actually saying like, hey, the good commands, the moral, ethical laws of God that you know, I have not come to get rid of them. I've actually come to fulfill them. And actually the rest of the Sermon on the Mount that we're gonna be stepping into is him taking us deeper into what God's commands really are. Like what God's really after, what he really wants from us, what a life of freedom under the king in his kingdom looks like. And so that's kind of cool. Like, so there's different ways that Jesus fulfills the law and prophets, but literally his teaching in the Sermon on the Mount is a way in which he's fulfilling the law, bringing it more, like taking us deeper, opening it up, things we hadn't seen before, the things that we had forgotten. So that's a bit complex, but but we said that earlier, it is complex.
It is complex. So, that's so helpful though, because that is such a, like it's just a short little sentence and there's so much in there,
line,
like fulfilled the law. So that was like so helpful to hear. And that's what we're discussing tonight in small groups, is what this means for our community. Is there anything that you when you are thinking about small groups and what they're going to be discussing tonight, anything that you, really want them to hear or really want them to focus on?
Yeah, I think what's interesting when we teach the Bible is sometimes we just teach things that aren't seemingly applicable. It's or at face value applicable. It's just like sometimes we just need to learn the context of something. And in some ways this section of Scripture just sets us up for everything that we're about to go into thematically. Like it's just kind of like, look at Jesus going, I haven't come to abolish, I've come to fulfill, I'm going to take you deeper into it. It's like, okay, great, wow, that's complex, I want to learn that. I think on the most on a practical level with this talk, I found myself thinking a lot about God's commands and the fact that they are commands, which is like not even a word that we use a lot with like a positive spin, but just like so struck by like, no, Jesus is saying like, hey, God had commands and I have commands for how to live in my kingdom. And he gets so specific. He's like, greatness in the kingdom is correlates with how much you obey these commands and teach them. And being least in the kingdom has to do with how much you dismiss these things. Don't pay attention to them. And even we know, if we've been in this series already, like the end of the sermon is like, hey, if you hear these things and put them into practice, you're building on something solid. If you don't put them into practice, you're building on something weak and it's gonna throw away. So what I'd love for us to talk about in small groups is a really simple question, like, why do you guys think we don't take the commands of God more seriously? And I say to you, but like literally, I'm asking myself that question. With all that I know, why don't I take his commands more seriously? Like I know I'm not saved by doing them, that I don't do them to get God's attention. We have God's attention through grace, but I'm like, no, they are commands. It does matter. And so I'd love for us to talk about, and maybe you feel like you do take his commands really seriously. I feel very convicted about that though in my own life though, like, man, like, these are commands. They're not like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, not a big deal till some later date or till you're fully saved. It's like, no, they matter now. And so I found myself wrestling with that. I'd love for us to talk about that. And you, like, do you have any other thoughts? I mean, from the talk, but also just from this theme around like what you think. I mean, you're a small group pastor. Like, what would you love for us to like make sure we include in discussion and conversation around it all? Yeah,
I think for myself, the law can, like you said, it's commands. But I think throughout the whole Sermon on the Mount and even in this passage, what Jesus is really trying to get at is a heart change and like actions that are reflective of a changed heart and like changed desires and even just like walking in step with how he lived. And so I think that's something that I would love for you guys to discuss and talk more about tonight in small groups.
Yeah, it's such a good note. And I think it's just like, so it's both things. It's like taking the commands of God seriously, but not letting that move us into some like outward show of obedience.
Yeah.
But to go, no, what's Jesus really after? Our hearts. And then like, yeah, being obedient from the heart. So then how do we get there? Like, I think maybe another question would be like, how can we help each other? Make sure that it's not fake, that we're not just putting masks on, that we're going to the heart of the issue, but then also that from the heart, we're helping one another take steps and actually being obedient to what Jesus calls us to. Beautiful, Becca. Thanks for hosting this time. Hope Small Group is awesome. We love you. We're praying for you. See you soon.